Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. This is the latest in the series of Stepping Up webcasts from TAtech. I'm Stephen O'Donnell, your host. If you don't know that, then shame on you. If you've seen the show before, then you'll know that the format is that we dig into to companies in the recruitment and talent technology space. We find out what they do, how they do, and what they're doing to affect better change in the industry round about them. Today, we take a bit of a left turn in that we're going to dig into a topic that I think is absolutely vital for people in business, and certainly something that that's regularly on my mind. Frankly, if I was a woman, it'd be on my mind all the time. But we're going to get into it with my very, very good friend, Katrina Hutchinson-O'Neill, who is the CEO and founder of Join Talent. Katrina, good afternoon. How are you?
I am good. Thank you very much. Enjoying some unusual Scottish sunshine today.
Well, that's great. That yeah, put that in the diary. We had
And
sunshine today.
that was the Indian summer. It happened for 2 hours this afternoon.
I always say that summer in Glasgow is my favourite week of the year. So, Katrina, I was intending to have a regular Stepping Up show where we're talking about Join Talent and the progress that you've made since we spoke last, and how the business is growing and evolving, and all the challenges that you have, and we will get into that. But today I want to speak about a post that you made on Monday, talking about women in business. Before we do that, however, just as a quick interjection, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, and again, shame on them, can you give us a bit about Join Talent and your background, please?
Yeah, sure. So I fell into recruitment, goodness, over 20 years ago. Didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Usual story of people that end up in recruitment. Fell into in-house TA, loved it, built a career in that. But got really frustrated that the solutions that I wanted didn't exist out there in the market in the way I wanted them. Had always wanted to start my own business, and so I gave up the corporate role and all of the benefits that come with that back in 2018 to set up Join Talent. And we're primarily a services business, but we've got two tech components, which are both separating into their own businesses within the group. The simple bit of what we do, if you can describe, whenever anybody who's not in TA asks me, what do we do? I tell them that we rent out recruiters, but clearly it's a lot more complicated than that. We provide a full embedded managed service model from the micro to the macro on a global level. And we've got a couple of really exciting tech and content platforms as well.
Fantastic. And you have clients all over the globe, not just big brands, but companies that we might not know of, but are literally circling the planet.
Yeah, literally at the minute we have footprint in 21 countries. We're servicing 56 countries. It's been really interesting, actually. If you look at the market dynamics, we were talking about this internally, literally just a Monday this week. The shifts that we've gone through over the last few years have been quite dramatic. We've got a huge ramp up that we're doing at the minute across a range of different clients, but the majority of it is more further offshore, kind of reflecting the trend that we're seeing in the market at the minute, which is interesting to see. Whereas 2 years ago, it was very, very UK, Germany, US centric. Now it's much further afield.
Are there particular clients that you're able to mention by name, just to get a fix on the kind of companies that you're working with?
Yeah, it's a really broad brush. So we're pretty much sector agnostic. And if you imagine what we do, it's really important that we've got deep specialism in a range of sectors, because our job is to manage the constant fluctuations in demand. And if we were wedded to one sector only, we'd be fluctuating as much as the clients. So we've got clients in defense, BAE, NATO as examples, in tech and retail, like Amazon, for example, all the way through to companies like Microsoft, and everything in between: financial services, pharmaceutical, engineering. You almost, if you can imagine it, we're working in that space.
Yeah. I always said when I was a recruiter at the front end dealing with multiple clients, I had a kind of helicopter view of those companies, because I'd be speaking with well, not only the hiring manager, but the people in TA and recruitment and HR, and you would understand how the company works, because you have to sell that company to candidates. In the same way, when you're working with these organizations worldwide, you're getting a view into their organizations that other people just don't get, and you're able to appreciate or understand their culture and how they go about things. And of course, they'll all be unique in their own ways. How do you see the luxury of looking into those companies and understanding their cultures?
It's a real privilege. And I think I've said this to you before. In my in-house career, I worked at TAtech, which is a US company, then at
Yeah.
HCL, Indian company, then RBS, then Nationwide. Those were my big heads of TA roles. But I was really a serial monogamist, right? So you were going very, very narrow and deep into those particular organizations, even though there was a good amount of diversity across those companies.
Yeah.
And it was a real game changer for me moving into this world where you're working with such diversity on every conceivable level, companies at every stage of their growth journeys, facing every one of the array of different drivers that you can imagine in terms of demand, process, challenges, technology. Also been on the front foot all the time about what's the next big thing. So anytime that somebody starts talking about, well, the next big place that everyone's going to be looking for talent is X, we've probably been doing it there already for several months.
Yeah.
So by the time, if I even look at the last 2 weeks, I think I've had 6 or 7 conversations in the last 2 weeks with an array of clients, some brand new, some returning clients that have been quiet for a while. And every one of them, I was being asked the same question about the same locations. Our C-suite team think that this
Yeah.
is the next big place. And I'm able to go, okay, well, let me tell you about, the 18 months of our experience of working in that market. And here's what we're seeing, and here's who your competition would be. It's a very privileged place to be.
Yeah. So when was Join Talent founded?
December 2018. So it's coming up to
Okay.
our 6th birthday, which is crazy. I only started with a 4-year business plan, Stephen.
I remember seeing you in Melbourne just at the very beginning, and you were putting it all together, and it seemed I don't want to say it seemed fantastical, but it seemed really ambitious at the time. And I'm thinking this is going to be something if you can pull it off. But what I
did
want to ask,
take photos of us
sorry,
in wetsuits. I found those on my phone. It came up on memories the other day. You
oh
and me
yeah,
in wetsuits. I think was Andrea Kirby making a swim with seals.
yes, the dolphins. That was really quite something. So in the time that Join Talent has been on, have you in that period? Has it been long enough to see the cycles in business? Obviously, you come through the pandemic, but to see the ups and downs, the peaks and the troughs, where your experiences has led you to know or to have more of an intuition about what's coming up.
Yeah, so we definitely have. But I think what's really helpful is for myself and most of my leadership team, the nearly 2 decades each individually that we have of experience in TA. I think we're long enough in the tooth that we understand almost the water cycle
Yeah,
of not just TA, but the business world, and ultimately the investment cycle that drives all of that. And it is very
yeah,
cyclical.
yeah,
So I think we're really good at being proportionate in our reactions, and thinking those 2 steps ahead.
yeah,
You probably saw that in 2020. So where the rest of our sector, if you like, we were very much squarely in the embedded sector at that stage, whereas today we would be spanning embedded and RPO.
yeah,
But we were a tiny little baby company back then, but we grew 4x during 2020. Versus the rest of the market at that point in the embedded sector
yeah,
significantly contracted. And the reason for that was we didn't listen to any of the received wisdom that was in the market in 2019, which was you need to go narrow and deep. You need to very deeply focus on one specific sector. That never made any sense to me. And
yeah,
the clients we were working with were amazing clients who back then most of our competitors turned their noses up at because they weren't sexy enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were amazing clients doing amazing things, and they all had to massively
Yeah.
expand during COVID years. So I think having that extra experience around the table is incredibly helpful, and it's done us proud over the last 6 years. And
Yeah.
this year is probably a good example of that. You know, we are looking at it literally, as I said, at the start of this week when we were having a review, getting ready for next year's forecast, and we've
Mhm.
nearly doubled in size since December of last year. And I
Give me an
think that's
idea of the kind of size of the organization now, in terms of, people out in the field, as it were.
yeah, so we're just under 250 at the minute, and at the
Yeah.
peak of 2022, that's about where we were. And then, like
Mhm.
everyone else in the market, we contracted. Big difference for us is that we tried to keep people on the bench. So we spent a lot
Yeah.
of money keeping people in jobs. So our head count on the face of it didn't contract as much as it might have done otherwise. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so then when we went into this year, we've had to work hard to really outperform the market to
Yeah.
get back to where we were. And that's what we've now pretty much managed to achieve. We're literally just touching distance back to where we had been. But the
Yeah.
dynamics underneath that have changed in terms of locations, etc. But that's
Yeah.
always a
Yeah.
constantly moving feast in global TA.
But the nature of the business means that you have to be agile, and respond to the markets as soon as you can see something coming down the line.
Absolutely. And we always kind of joke about it that in JT land, we think about days and weeks, not months and
Yeah.
years. That, you know, you're
Yeah.
you're constantly planning out. Although you might have a strategic plan that takes you out for the next 24 months,
Yeah.
really you're dealing with changes that are happening on a daily and weekly basis.
Yeah. So, I mentioned at the start we have a topic I want to get into, and what we've been speaking about so far is by way of context, and I should throw in as well that you're recently crowned Businesswoman of the Year, on top of quite a few other accolades that you and the business have won in the past few years, and that's for context and credibility, because what you posted on Monday about women in business, female-led businesses, entrepreneurs, was I think a shock and a fright to some. Sadly, not surprising to others, but something that's just not spoken about as widely as it should be. So, for the benefit of those who haven't read it, and if you haven't, I'm going to post the link to it just here now. Can you give us the précis on what you were speaking about on your post?
Yeah, so this is a challenge that's getting worse, not better. I think, like most people, when I started JT, I believed the rhetoric that there was all of this amazing support for female entrepreneurs. And I talk about female entrepreneurs because that's my lived experience. I don't
Yeah.
have the lived experience of other minority entrepreneurs. So,
Hmm.
but I'm sure they could speak as eloquently about their lived experience.
Yeah.
But I assumed there was all of that help that was available. And to date, I have still never had, Joint Talent has never had a penny of support. We've had no government grants. We've not been part of any funded programs or anything like that.
Hmm.
And in fact, when I set up the business, I was told I was too old by one company that's supposed to be there to support female entrepreneurs because I was 40 when I set up the
Yeah.
business, clearly past it. And that they were only interested, another one was only interested in supporting female entrepreneurs in male dominated sectors, even though within the embedded world, I'm the only female
Yeah.
founder
Yeah.
that's in our space, in our geographical areas. And it was crazy. And I thought that was just my experience. So I thought,
Hmm.
recruitment is it's a whole separate conversation about how investors look at TA and TA companies. That's a whole separate issue. And the
Mm.
fact that investors get really mixed up between agencies and embedded and all of that stuff. And then I've gone on this journey over the last few years, and what I have discovered is that every female entrepreneur I talk to has got similar stories, many much worse than mine.
Yeah.
And the stats that I talked about in the post that I put out on Monday, I think most people are shocked by. So back 10 years ago, out of every £1 of investment, and the stats in the US are pretty much equitable to this as well, but
Yeah.
every £1 of investment that went to entrepreneurs, 2.5 pence of that goes to female entrepreneurs, which was crazy. And you would
Yeah.
think then in the last 10 years, well, that's bound to have got better.
Yeah.
And instead of getting better, it's got worse. And the latest stats that are just out this year show that it's 1.8 pence out of every pound.
Yeah.
And on top of that, less and less businesses proportionately are being run by female founders. So we've now dropped to it's only 15% of businesses. And on
Mm.
top of that, and I think it's a combination of those two things and many other things,
Mm.
female-led businesses are significantly less likely to go on to do that kind of critical milestone of 1 million turnover per annum.
Mm.
Um, so typically you're looking at just under 10% of male-run, male-founded businesses will go on to achieve that. It's 0.15% of female-founded businesses. So when you look at the entire thing, all of the rhetoric, all of the initiatives that have landed, and when I talk to my huge network of other female entrepreneurs who are just amazing and so supportive of each other, nothing that's been done so far has worked. In fact, it seems to have had the opposite impact. And you've got a
Yeah.
lot of, frankly, very pissed off women out there.
Mhm.
And if I look at that female entrepreneur community, I think that righteous anger and indignation is now very much spilling over, and you're starting to see a lot
Mhm.
more of that online, and very much those female founders starting to take action into their own hands. So last night I was in Edinburgh um, with the amazing Anna Stewart, who'd invited me out for dinner.
Yeah.
Anna was one of the two co-authors of the Pathways report, which was the Scottish Government report into the terrible state of exactly this issue for female
Yeah.
entrepreneurs in Scotland. And there were 12 of us around the table last night, all amazing female Scottish entrepreneurs, and every single one of us on the same page that we now have to do something ourselves, working
Mhm.
together, because sitting back
Yeah.
and waiting for government to catch up, we could waste another 10 years and get
Yeah.
nowhere.
Yeah. So when going back to you mentioned investors. You could say investors are not in the business of uh, changing the stats or of encouraging more women into business. They're in the business of investing £1 million and getting £4 or £5 million back, and they would go for the safest bets with the odd gamble thrown in. Uh, how do you deal with that? Is it their responsibility, or is it government's role to provide that stimulus where the market is not stepping in with investment and support for women who are starting and building businesses?
So there's probably about four different answers to that question,
Mhm.
and depending on
Yeah.
what way you want to tackle it, I guess one answer to that is it's a little bit like in the TA world where we talk about early careers and the fact that
Yeah.
we don't have enough diversity in tech roles, for example, right? So
Uh-huh.
we've all recognized the issue for years and years and years. There's not enough female talent, for example, coming through in STEM subjects. Now, who do you blame for that? So is that the employer's fault? Well, no, it depends
Mhm.
on how many people are coming through university. Is it the
Yeah.
university's fault? Well, they've got a role to play in getting more female undergraduates in, but you've really start to look back, and you've got to go back to school, right? So you've kind of got to go
Mm.
all the way back to how do we get girls at primary school to get more interested and more excited and engaged in STEM subjects to fix the problem the whole way through.
Yeah.
This is one answer to your question is the issue is somewhat within that. Women make up 50% of our population, but they make up 15% of our entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
number one issue is we need to go back and go, what are the plethora of barriers that are preventing women from proportionately taking their seat at that table? Because that is
Mhm.
a huge statistical disparity, that 50% of the population are only being represented as 15% of the entrepreneurial world. That's insane. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of work to do there, and that's not on investors per se. That again goes back to society, schools, role models, support for younger women, thinking like when
Mhm.
I was a kid, even why did I start a business when I was 40? Honestly, I kind of probably always thought in the back of my head that being an entrepreneur was something that you had to be a bloke that went to a special school to do.
Mm.
It certainly wasn't something for me going to a state school that I thought as a teenage girl was something that was supposed to be for me. That was never talked about. No careers teacher ever sat down and said, have you ever
Yeah.
thought about entrepreneurs, or here's what that might look like? It was, you can be a vet, you can be a secretary, you could be a doctor, you could be a journalist. Those were the kind of options, right? So
Yeah.
that's one part of it. The other part of it is the way that the institutionalized misogyny still happens today, and it is excessive. And if anyone that
Mm.
thinks that's rhetoric, go speak to some female entrepreneurs and ask them for their stories. They are shocking.
Yeah.
The things that are said about and to female entrepreneurs by the
Give me
investors,
give me an example or two.
they're the sort of things that in the corporate world you might have heard in the 70s or 80s. So
Mm.
just in the last week, we are having this conversation. One female entrepreneur was telling us that she was asked by a potential investor. They said, "You're a good-looking girl. Surely you're bound to want to have kids soon. And how's that going to impact my investment?" So that was just said as part of the course. There's no issue with that. Apparently, that's a perfectly acceptable thing.
Yeah.
Another one was told, um, I might consider investing in you because you're a lesbian, but if you weren't, then I wouldn't, because I don't invest in women of
Jesus
childbearing
Christ.
age. They,
Yeah.
these are the ones that I can tell because they're safe for work on a daytime
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it goes on. It is absolutely horrific. And there's a really interesting, you can Google it. There's a really interesting piece of work was done by Harvard. So
Hmm.
they looked at 1,500 presentations that were done by entrepreneurs to a group of PE and VC investors. They recorded the conversations, and what they analysed was very specifically looking at how were males reacted to and how were they given feedback
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
females. So what did the potential investors say? And in particular, whenever you had a male and a female who had almost identical backgrounds, pitches, presentations, and
Yeah.
that was incredibly revealing and matches up to everything that I hear
Yeah.
about in my world, and that I see, a young
Hmm.
male, a potential entrepreneur just out of university, was
Yeah.
celebrated and got feedback saying, oh, he's really young and ambitious. A female, exactly the
Yeah.
same background, there was no difference, was young and inexperienced, and therefore they couldn't invest in her. The institutionalized misogyny
Yeah.
is pretty real.
Ma-
Um,
Many men. Sorry, on you go.
no, I was going to say, and just the other key answer to your question, when you talk about investors, you're absolutely right. An investor's job's to make money, right? That's
Yeah.
completely get that. And I really do believe one of the recommendations that was in the Pathways report, which I think is the only thing that will really make a difference on this,
Hmm.
is that there should be increased tax breaks. And this probably isn't just for female founders. I think this should
Yeah.
apply for people investing in other minority founders, but for the
Hmm.
government to have increased tax breaks for investors who
Yeah.
invest in minority owned and run businesses. So we've got SEIS and EIS today. Imagine if the benefits under
Yeah.
that were increased by 50% if it was a minority run business. That's what would really make a difference.
Yeah. Well, when you think about what's being lost by all those businesses that aren't started by women, who have been put off, deflected, knocked back from the bank, told it's not for them, then all of those businesses that weren't started, well, that's lost opportunity. And I was going to say, for any men watching this who have been in business, who think, well, what can I do about it? It's nothing to do with me. I'll take whatever's offered to me, and everyone else has to do the same. They do need to appreciate and I don't want to be overly woke on this, but the privilege that they have from being in the position that they are. So when I was 27, I started my first business, and my youngest son had just been, sorry, my oldest son had just been born, And no one said to me, "Are you mad? What are you doing? Who can consider taking such a risk to drop a salary to go and start a business?" No one said anything untoward other than, on you go. That's great, and it worked out fine. But there was no question that this would be much of a gamble. Whereas in the same position, a woman with the same background at the same age. Would be told, no, it's not for you. That's only for the pushy women, for the the women who are much more confident than you. You're not that confident. You can't do these kinds of things. And if it's told to you again and again, then you're going to start believing at least some of that. And when you do see successful women in business, whether it's yourself or in Scotland, Wendy McDougall, or countless others, then people often say, yeah, they're really pushy and assertive and bossy, and these words get pushed around. And on the one hand, that's a very sexist thing to say, and downright wrong. But also, you have to be pushing harder to succeed as a woman, and it shouldn't have to be the case, because businesses should succeed on merit, not on whatever the prevailing culture is on. Well, women shouldn't be in business.
Yeah, and listen, a lot of what you said resonates. I know when I decided to give up my job as the main wage earner, my husband's a teacher, and I'm sure you probably heard they don't earn that much, sadly. And I got told I was irresponsible by people in my wider family. Like, you're irresponsible. Why would you give up your career? I'm pretty sure if, the gender tables have been turned, it might have been, wow, that's really brave.
Yeah.
And you get that every day. What's interesting, and I'm going to put it both ways, and funny, I was talking to a really good friend of mine, is Emma Seal, who is the CEO and founder of Killing Kittens.
Yeah.
And Emma and I we were both finalists for the same award on Friday night, and we went together. So she was sitting next to me. And we were having this conversation. We found both of our partners, our husbands, have had the same experience of reverse sexism on the basis that they are married to a female founder. I used to work with somebody who I don't work with anymore, who would constantly make pretty derogatory comments about my husband, inferring that he was somehow less than or henpecked or not wearing the ridiculous, because his wife was running a business. So it's not just the women involved who experience some of this, but also those amazing men who are supporting them, who also experience the social issues.
So I was doing a bit of reading on this. There's a report from Shoesmiths that were saying that going back to the financial crisis, 2008 to 11, the drop back in business all across the board was more keenly felt by the statistics on women in business and people from diverse backgrounds in business, that they were going out of business at a faster rate or being less supported than other businesses, and didn't recover either in numbers or in confidence for a long time after that. So they effectively had to start again, and a lot of them were put off ever being in business again, following on from that. So whenever there's those cyclical dips or recessions in business globally, then the people that fall out are the people who are supported the least, and the people who are supported the least are often, as you say, women and people from diverse backgrounds. They don't have the same support network that there is institutionally for men in business. It just doesn't happen.
And some of it's just investment, Stephen. Some of it is if you and I know I've led this business now for 6 years through boom times and tougher times. Thankfully, not bust for us, but boom and tougher times. We don't have investors. We don't have debt as a business. So you don't have that safety net. You have to manage your business in an incredibly smart way to maintain that those treasury funds and that safety net. And you have to be on it at all times. When times are tougher, in like 2023, you had to be really on it in terms of every cent of cash flow. I would argue, it would be a little bit easier if you had the safety net of a well-heeled investor or group of investors that you knew you could
Mm,
call on the bank of mum or dad if your back was up against a wall because they didn't want to lose their investment by seeing the
yeah,
business come to harm. When you look at the fact that women are so significantly less likely to have, to your
yeah.
point, that infrastructure and that support,
Mhm.
is it any wonder that when they're running on that tightrope without that safety net, that perhaps when times are tough, they could find it more difficult?
Yeah, yeah. I mentioned there the early doors, and one of the earliest conversations that anyone has in business is with a bank manager or a potential bank manager, where they're trying to open an account, get an overdraft facility, and get that ball rolling. And every business starts at zero. You might have a bit of cash to start off with, but you're starting from day one, and if you don't have investors on day one, then you're bootstrapping it, and it's harder to do. But down the line, a result of that, something that's inevitably part of that, is that the shareholding of companies, where even if it's a woman leading the business, is usually spread amongst multiple people, and it's quite unusual for a woman to be either majority shareholder or 100% owner of their business, because they brought other people into the team to spread the risk for the conversations that they have with the bank manager or investors or even clients, when the clients want to know, well, so who's the guy running this business, and that has obviously an effect when it comes to getting investment or having an exit, and holding out for that exit. There are stats, I don't have them to hand, but there are stats on how long women in business will stay with a business while the value is going up and up, as opposed to taking the first offer or stepping out of the business when there's a reasonable offer on the table, and not sticking with a business and getting the much bigger returns. So when you see businesses that are over £100 million in valuations, or even billionaires, you just don't see women getting there, and that's not through lack of ability. It's through many other factors that are in the road to there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work being done on that at the minute. So Sam Smith, she started Super Scalers,
Yeah,
which is very specifically focused on trying to create the next wave of female-run businesses that are doing that magic number of 50 million ARR, or it may not be ARR depending on the nature of the business, but let's say 50
yeah,
million turnover per annum. And there's a huge focus on that. And again, this goes back to then creating the role models that inspires the next generation. There was a great conference on this about 6 weeks ago in Edinburgh that was headed up by Anna and Pathways,
yeah,
talking about this very issue, and Sam was there talking at it. So they're recognized issues. I think my key takeaway is that what you're going to see more of are those female business leaders and entrepreneurs starting to take matters into their own hands, because they expecting the rhetoric that's come from government to
yeah.
sort it out hasn't worked.
So in terms of solutions, you've been in business for what, 8 years now, and
6 years.
yeah, oh sorry, 6 years. But you'll now be at a stage where new businesses run by women are coming to you and asking, so how do I navigate this? What should I avoid? What should I work towards? What are the key metrics that I need to have to prove my worth to investors, to come and be part of my business? And how are you responding to them?
Well, to be honest, if that's the advice someone's looking for, I'd probably connect them to one of the other amazing female entrepreneurs in my network that's been through that cycle, because
Yeah,
I don't have any investors in
yeah,
JT. And
yeah. Mhm.
so I can tell them, as someone who's done several investments myself, I can tell them what I'm looking for, and I can give mentoring and coaching on that. I can tell them
Mhm.
how to scale a business and some of the things that they should be looking at. But when it
Yeah,
comes to navigating, I've never had to properly do a pitch for investment. I'm going to point them in the direction of somebody who's able to give them that support. And there's a lot of amazing women out there who are great at it.
Yeah.
I see a lot of pitches. I do see that there's a marked difference, generalizing, of course, but there is a marked difference generally in the way that women tend to pitch versus men. And I think I'd probably characterize it as the female pitches I see tend to be more considered, more reflective, more realistic.
Yeah.
Often when you see male pitches, they're more aspirational, I think is probably the word for it, which
Yeah.
can be translated to potentially coming across as more confident.
Concepts of a plan.
Yeah, well, I think more, and again, as I say, generalizing, more likely that when I'm seeing a male pitch, that
Hmm.
they are more likely to state with confidence that X, Y, or Z is absolutely going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, when actually that is their forecast, or it's what they might want to desire to get to, but they don't have a concrete that's going to
Yeah.
be there. Whereas a female pitching will tend to be more considered. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the that I don't think that women should have to change that, but I think that when it
Hmm.
comes to pitching to investors, investors should be more tuned into that.
Yeah.
So there's a few different things that I can share from my experience, but having been through that cycle myself is not one of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We had hold on. We had a speaker at TAtech last year at one of our events, Renee Lalonde, who runs iTalent Digital in the US. Exceptionally successful, really impressive, and she mentioned something that I've heard with a number of entrepreneurs where they've bootstrapped or stayed away from any kind of finance for much longer than other businesses would have through a combination of not wanting to be reliant on any other hand on the tiller, and also in keeping control as much as they can, and also not always being available to them. So Renee is a great example. And in Scotland, I mentioned earlier Wendy McDougall at Firefish. Wendy built Firefish over a decade before even considering taking investment and building it as a successful and profitable business in its own right. Not aspirational, we'll be profitable one day, but we need to be profitable now. We need to pay the bills and we need to show a dividend. So running it as an old-fashioned profitable business, as opposed to on the back of a cigarette packet, and one day the money will come. So you see the path taken by women in business being different, and I'd like that to be appreciated more, where they and that's not to characterize all women in business, but that women are going to tackle issues and run their businesses in slightly different ways. So in terms of what can we do, if you were prime minister for the day and were able to enact anything, what would you do with that magic wand?
I think probably two key things, possibly three actually. One of them it would absolutely be looking at tax incentives, as I've already mentioned, for
Hmm.
investors into minority-owned, particularly female businesses.
Yeah.
Second, when it comes to task forces, I would have a very different take on how I was setting up and populating those task forces.
Yeah.
Perhaps more people who have been there, done that, got the t-shirt in
Hmm.
working in those task forces. And then the third is really to go back to what I was saying in terms of that earlier funnel, really looking at curriculums for schools. And
Hmm.
I think they're starting to get better at this, but I think it's the schools doing it, not necessarily the educational curriculum, but really looking at
Hmm.
curriculum for
Yeah.
schools, in particular for girls, and looking at both business and STEM subjects and how they were being taught. There's a lady called Sarah Minty who runs a company called Developing Experts, who
Yeah.
is doing astounding things in this space, influencing policy at government level in countries all around the world to revolutionize the way that education is delivered. And adopting her curriculum would be a huge step forward for the UK,
Yeah.
really tying in subjects to future workplace, the kind of Jack Ma philosophy in education. So it would probably be those things. But I would caveat all of that with saying, and you kind of touched on this a bit in what you were saying, not every business needs investment. And there is the cult of the raise, which is really dangerous. And that's come from a lot of different places, including very often success being calculated. You know, you're getting on a list for the most valuable companies based on who's raised, that kind of thing. Where, you know, the crux of Join Talent is a professional services business. Do I think you have to raise? Well, I think we've proven that you don't. You know, we've not done it. To continue to build JT, would I go and do a raise? No. And I know that other embedded companies have taken on investors, and I don't really understand why, unless it's I've decided that I want to take number one market share and buy my way to there. We've been very much the let's work hard, let's grow organically. But if I look at the tech products that we've built out along the way that we're pulling into separate arenas, if you were starting those from scratch, that's a different kettle of fish. If you're going to have a significant amount of time pre-revenue and you've got to get the product built, you've got to jump through legal hoops, you've got to pay your DevOps team, completely different. But recognizing that women are potentially more likely to start up services businesses than tech businesses, if you look at the statistics, there's a few complexities to consider within that, but don't get stuck in the cult of the race.
It's often said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. You know, if people look to people like yourself as an example of, well, if Katrina can do it, then it can be done. And I'm as smart as her. So, you know, anyone can look at what you do. And that's not to say that they can replicate it, but they can take inspiration from what you're doing, what other women in business are doing. I'd made a note earlier. There's a few women. I just want to mention that in the recruitment sector are doing amazing things. There's a couple in our awards for the Noras in best innovation. So May Yip at Eric. There's a company Vizzy who I'm forgetting the woman's name now, but she at Wreckfest won the £50,000 prize for the pitch competition there. Renee Lalonde, I mentioned, Tracy Parsons, Wendy McDougall, Emma Merrington, and Tony Manicheri, who is with Lumini, Hilda Kabushenga. We know that I think everyone knows Kirsty Kelly, who built a business and sold, and Andrea Wade the same. Beverly Collins,
Lisa Scales, don't forget as well.
Absolutely. Lisa Scales, phenomenal. Real leader in what she was able to establish there. So there are plenty of inspirations out there. You shouldn't have to look far to find them, but when you see the number of businesses that are run by men, and that's where those proportions come from, those percentages that, frankly, they don't stack up. It doesn't make sense. So the lost opportunity is what we're missing out on. And anything at all that can be done to shift the needle a little bit absolutely should be. So on that note, I'm going to say, Katrina, thanks for being such a great guest this afternoon. Always a pleasure finding out more about Join Talent, and long may things continue on the up for JT.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone who's joined us today. If you're watching live or on replay, or you're just sharing it around people to impress your friends, then thanks for joining in. The edited version of this will be up just shortly. But if you've seen it on any of the streams, then please like and share. And we'll see you soon with some more shows from TAtech. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.